So Adrian is the Research Development and Innovation Director at WineTech, which stands for Wine Industry Network of Expertise Technology, which sounds very interesting, so we'll understand what this means shortly. It's a space for collaboration and transfer of scientific technological knowledge in the vinicultural sector. Adrian is an academic scientist, started his career in academics, and he was introduced to the world of wine during his PhD, which he did in wine biotechnology in 2008 in Stellenbosch University in South Africa, including a year in Bordeaux. After his PhD, however, he left academia and started working for a French-owned private company in South Africa in the wine industry, doing commercial sales, services, and consulting for wineries. He ended up buying this company and became the CEO. But then after a decade, he made a change in his career, completely away from services, and started working for the South Africa wine industry, which is the body that funds and drives viniculture research, development, and innovation. In summary, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. So Adrian, thanks for being here today with us. Where are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Joseph. Thank you for that very kind introduction. That's I've never been introduced like that, so appreciate that.
Yeah, we hope it was not too long. We didn't bore the audience. I hope they're still here. But let's. So where are you speaking from? Where are you sitting today?
I'm sitting at my house in just outside Stellenbosch. Comfortable, relaxed, and hope we can have a good discussion. Yes, in South Africa. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm in Madrid. So we're speaking from Madrid to South Africa. Okay, right. So let's have the first question to get us going.
Right.
So let's have a conversation by understanding what exactly is Smart Vineyard and why is this important?
Okay, Joseph. So thank you. As we just heard from the report of Giorgio, and I think he mentioned pretty much half of the things I want to touch on today with the OIV's report. But it's such an overwhelming topic. I think there's so much happening, and it's difficult to stay up to date. So as you mentioned, we fund research. So we're looking at bringing it from that perspective, and I hope I can provide some context and some value to some of the people in the audience. So I wanted to start off by creating a scenario. So imagine a farmer. He takes his cup of coffee, he walks out of his house onto his porch, and then he overlooks his vineyards. And up there on the top, there's a very nice big vineyard that sometimes gives him some problems. And he liked to go there because it gives him a very good a view of the rest of the farm. The view is fantastic. But he cannot go there anymore because he injured his knee. He had an operation because he fell over his dog. Can you believe it? So instead, for him to access that vineyard, it always concerns him. He takes out his mobile phone and he opens up his viticultural app. And on the app, it shows him all the blocks of the layout of his farm. And he goes to the specific block. And then there's got an option that comes up and says Scout. So he presses Scout, and out somewhere on the little farm, a little drone comes out from his little house where it can recharge itself and flies out. And about 10-15 minutes later, he gets a notification and he gets an image of all the rows beautifully laid out on a specific block with some red zones identified and triggered. And then he gets the option to say investigate. So the drone goes back, goes a bit closer, takes another photo of the structure and the plants and the leaves, and then he gets the notification say identify. And then after the identification, comes up a recommendation, and it tells him he needs to apply some fungicide. It is powdery mildew. So and then after that, on the phone comes up a warning, and the warning tells him, well, be cautious. There's very strong winds coming in the next 3 days. Do not apply right now. Apply only in 4 or 5 days time. So Joseph, Smart Vineyards, there's a lot in this. There's a lot of IoT, there's a lot of technology, and a lot of things that needs to happen and have to happen in the right way, in the right place to make this function. So, and this is just a fraction of what Smart Vineyards is about. And it's not just, I don't know why they call it Smart Vineyard. It's not the vineyard that's smarter, it's more the people that get smarter.
Or need to get smarter. We hope they get smarter with the technology.
Exactly, you need to get smarter. So in essence, it's a vineyard where, I mean, to summarize, it's a lot of different technologies, a lot of different sensors, monitoring devices, weather stations, images from drones and satellite navigation systems are applied ultimately to to collect a lot of field data, and the data is then typically collected in the vineyard space in real time or over time. And then the critical thing that needs to happen then is that all that raw data needs to be submitted to computer modeling, artificial intelligence we heard about, and machine learning technologies, so that the key critical and relevant information can be extracted from the data. And I mean, ultimately, this is for us to provide us with a better way of observing what is going on in the vineyard. And it's also for us to ultimately then take action. So why is this important? It's overwhelming, but why is it important? So, I mean, it allows us and as an industry, and specifically the growers, to ultimately take more factors into account when we make decisions. I mean, somebody once said, I mean, to optimize and to farm more profitably, you shouldn't focus on the farm and holistically. You should actually start focusing on the individual blocks, and the smart and digital technologies that's been developed will allow us to even focus on specific zones within the vineyards. So I think to sum it up, I mean, it helps us for decision making, and ultimately, in the end, it must help us to help the grape growers save costs and far more profitable and sustainable.
Okay, so very interesting. So you've given us an overview of what this is, and also the objectives that we could achieve with this. But what is all this technology being used for concretely?
Well, the possibilities and applications are absolutely endless at this stage. But before I go into a few, maybe some raw examples, I mean, it's important to know, what do we actually measure? So Giorgio discussed just briefly on it, but as well, when we look at things that are happening in the environment in the vineyard, climate, weather, the soil, geographic locations, measuring the microclimate around the vineyard, and we're looking at the vineyard structure itself, the canopy, the bunches, and more focus actually what's happening directly into the plant. So that's first of all important. As was mentioned already, we know that technologies like remote sensing, the science of measuring things far from a distance with drones and satellites, and the GIS systems, when it's combined, it's become very, very popular for us to really devise maps that make sense in terms of terroir, sloping, elevations, temperature. And that's where the decision support really, really helps. And it helps producers, because, I mean, everybody likes looking at pictures, and because pictures make sense and it's easy to understand and explain that thing. So I think the key thing here is the technologies are applied for two ways. Currently, and where it is at, it's more as a reactive way. I mean, addressing problems, maybe in season, the short-term decision making, address variability, and ultimately identifying quick risks. But I think holistically, where the technology are going, and I don't want to talk about the classic stuff that's already been mentioned today, but I mean, it's becoming the more proactive way, the planning, the future sustainability, gearing us for climate change readiness, I think, and longer term. So, and on that note, I mean, yeah, we already know with this, if you just Google the technologies of smart viticulture, you'll see it's targeted applications for fertilizations in specific zones, the way we spray is applied, determining driving forces behind the problematic areas. And yeah, I think when combining satellite images with crop monitoring, as I mentioned, it can help us identify the weak areas in the vineyard and how to address the weak areas specifically, and not the whole vineyard if it's not necessary. And that can help save costs. So I think that's where we are at.
Okay, so these are interesting because all of these top-notch technologies have slow adoption periods, and and they have slow adoption periods in every industry. Usually, the services one, like banks and telco, because they don't move any product, are easy to adopt them. But as you move into more physical legacy industries, it takes more time.
Yeah.
So some of the people in the audience may be skeptical and thinking, wow, this sounds like science fiction. So tell us some examples of how is this being deployed in the industry.
Thanks, Joseph. Yes, that's a hard discussion point, and I think a key focus area. But to start with that, I think it's important to mention, as you said, there's many different levels of interest. I mean, ultimately, the wine grower must completely know what he wants to achieve before there's adoption. We know the researchers and scientific community, they love technology, they love gathering data and information. So it's really, they get excited about the project, and there's a very, very fast move in that. We struggle to keep up with that. I think the adoption really comes in from consulting companies and consultants. and even startups, where it brings a fresh perspective from their side. It creates opportunity for them to really add value to their services and their consultation services and the offerings. And of course, they can charge a bit more money and sell products, sell technology as well. The key and the most important thing about adoption is, I mean, the grape grower, the farmer, the guy with the sore knee on the farm. Well, I think the adoption there is where the issues lie and what we need to really try to understand. When the software and the user-friendly versions come out more and more, and the devices are developed, I think that will help adoption. You know, grape growers, they trust each other. They don't trust consultants always. They take their advice. And I think when the case studies start growing more and more as it's been rolled out, that will really start driving the adoption from them. So because ultimately they, you know, grape growers trust the conventional methods. So just some case studies. We already know that we talk about pest and disease monitoring. I think soil measurements, identifying variations. So a few weeks ago, we had in South Africa, we had the National Shiraz Technical Day, and then they evaluated about 144 wines was entered, and about the top 12 ones are then discussed. And then on the day, a startup company, one startup about 2 years old, a consulting company, spoke specifically how and showed how remote sensing was used to monitor the ripeness in a Shiraz block and the effect it had on wines. And then ultimately they were supported by a technical tasting. But in essence, I mean, they used crop monitoring in different zones in the block. They compared the vegetation index. They looked at the different soil mapping, the water movement, and also the canopy development. And they overlaid information from actual measurements in terms of the weighted sugar accumulations. And then ultimately it resulted in wines that's showing different styles. So from this point on, obviously, here the application outcome is really where we have to decide, once you see the variations on your land from the technologies in smart vineyards, I mean, we have to devise an action plan. Is the action plan to, if you detected earlier, to work to more homogeneous vineyards closer to harvesting, or do you want to do selective harvesting? And I think that's where the power of these digital innovations and discussions come in. There's pros and cons in terms of wineries in the States, whether they want to do selective harvesting or whether they want to do it as a whole. So that's just one case. I think another very interesting thing that came out also from the expert interviews and the surveys is the whole discussion about data, information gathering, databases. Where are we going with this? I mean, I think ultimately the digitalization, if you talk digitalization, you talk about databases. I mean, that's where it is. Information must be stored somewhere. And I think in this case, we've also have a project. There's a lot of things going on in terms of climate change readiness tools. And climate change involves a lot of information to be gathered and to be stored and to be processed. So we're looking at a project that empowers long and short-term decision making, focusing specifically on climate data, which is the long-term weather data, as well as the terrain data, and I think it can be used on farm level, on regional level, and on block level, and it's being showcased now how I mean, with machine learning of almost 50 layers of information. And by layers, I mean temperature is a layer, solar radiation is a layer, humidity is a layer, can be used to develop suitability tools. Now, this is the most important thing. I think suitability tools is the way to go forward, but you have to understand and really try and figure out which layer, which data is the most relevant information to provide suitability tools. And what the uptake of this at the moment in the adoption is specifically to help growers to compare blocks with each other. Why do some blocks compare better to other blocks? And how do they compare vintage to vintage? So I think in-season decision making. And then also the more interesting thing is the hindsight analysis. When you start gathering data over time, and it will take a lot of time for us to get to that point, but then you can start comparing and overlay climatic information with block information to see how it links to quality and flavor profiles going forward. And that's what we see is busy happening in our context as well.
Okay. Hey, a follow-up question to this one, because when we link the two parts of your answer, you first talked about the need to get to the grower and for the grower to adopt it.
Yeah.
And that's where the value happens. But then you also gave us some great examples, but that feel complicated. So in your experience, let's be short. I don't think this is a question that just occurred to me. Why are the growers adopting this? I mean, what are the fears or the barriers, or when you speak to one of them, what do they say that, which is a reason for them not taking a step and adopting these technologies you have been explaining?
I think when industries are starting to struggle, the first thing that they always tell us, the first thing they fire, in my experience as a previous consultant, is they say, we're not interested in consultants anymore. We don't want to pay for analysis. That scares anybody out there. So I think, and traditionally we know grape growers. They are very traditional in the way of thinking, the school of thought. But I think the adoption is also slow because they're cautious about the implementation cost and the impact it will have, and it will disrupt the way that they do things traditionally. I think there's many reasons. It depends also in terms of the people, whether you farm for quality or whether you farm for production itself, for volume. And then, so yes, it's a difficult one, but we're seeing the change. The adoption are coming slowly. As I said, the case studies will grow, and then growers will start trusting growers in terms of examples.
Okay, great.
And successes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So before we continue, I want to tell the audience that we're going to be taking questions. We're not going to do it at the end. So as Adrian speaks, please send your questions, and Tim will pass them to me, and we'll address them soon. Okay, so continuing with you, Adrian. Okay, so this is very interesting stuff. So before we dig deeper, I have a more personal question.
Yes.
Which is, how do you get immersed into this world? Because it's not like I assume you didn't wake up when you were 15 and say, I want to be a technology expert in the wine sector to help wineries with this very complicated stuff. So how did you find this passion? How do you got into it?
I've always been a scientist and a researcher at heart. But I remember when I was working in my company, I one day went to the Stellenbosch University campus. We had an analytical laboratory. I had a meeting there, and as I walked in there, I ran into a colleague, somebody from industry, in a sort of a pass-by moment, and she said, purely by chance, yes, do you know that WineTech is advertising a new position for a research and development manager? And she said, well, there's very few people with the experience of working in industry from a business point of view and having academic experience. I think you've got the skills, you should apply. And my first response was, no, thank you very much. I'm not interested. I've got my own business. I worked very hard for that for the last 10 years. And then I left. And as I was on the way, it started bothering me. It really, really bothered me. And I mean, long story short, it followed actually 3 months of brutal, deep introspection of where I am in my life, what I want to do in my business. Do I want to continue chasing monthly sales targets as a service provider for the industry? So it was, and do I really want to go out of my comfort zone? And yeah, it's a deep question, it's a very personal question. But I think ultimately I made a decision, and interviews were made both ways. And I realized I can actually really get out of my comfort zone again and apply my skills and bring it closer and actually bring value and difference. So I think I also got, on a personal level, very personal, I think I also got sort of tired with between partners in the business of changing my perspective of being a forward thinker and a strategic person, where the business sort of just demanded chasing turnover year after year, and it wasn't just working for me. So yeah, I changed it, and they say when a flower doesn't bloom, you have to change the environment it grows in, and not the flower, and that's what I did. I changed my environment, and I suddenly found myself smack bang in the middle of a wine industry research portfolio that the ranges covers everything from terroir to taste, or from and today, I think I really enjoy bringing the value to academia, research, and to the wineries and the wine industry, and vice versa, bridging that gap, because there's a very huge problem there. And yes, we continuously have to upskill ourselves. It's an exciting environment to work in. There's more questions than answers, and we get to do innovation challenges and hopefully help the people to turn their wonderful ideas into value.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I really like your quote. but let's change flower for grape. Next one. Okay. Okay, great. So tell us what you're working on. What's interesting? You know, gets our creative juices flowing, and convince those growers that are not using this technology to use it through the things you're working on.
I think firstly, to start off there, it's important because we're talking about digitalization, and I think it was mentioned right in the beginning as well, in the greater terms of the sector. I mean, we're ultimately trying to put method to this madness. As a funder, we have to figure out what's going on and what is relevant for who. So when you talk about sensors and technologies in general, you're not talking about research anymore. It becomes innovation, and it becomes there's ideas that you have to give value, and you have to return academic outputs and turn it into outcomes for the industry. So I think the first point here, what I'm working on in our organization, is we quickly see we're not ready for this process. What follows? How do you take an idea and turn it into value? And I think just to touch on something there is internal innovation and operational innovation. I think it's very important just to mention it now because the OIV is part of their plan as well. And I think we quickly realized as with digital tools in viticulture, we have to implement and to help you make decisions on a day-to-day basis. We had to decide how to change our operational functioning as a business. And we went online probably about 3-4 years ago and put everything on Google platforms. The way we ask questions, the way we ask for research projects, the way we evaluate them. And the interesting thing about that, and I think what people must realize here is just by changing that way of doing things and the insights we got from that process, it changed the way we think and the way that information that we classically see. I think that's very important for people to understand that the value of digitalization. You get to see things in a different perspective, and it's not just about new things. It's about also how one does new things. So I think it's very important for the people to understand here also. I mean, the formulation of research and research questions changes completely when you start demanding an innovative outcome versus an academic output. And understanding the possibility of the industry uptake right from the beginning when you start projects. It changes everything. So I think digitalization plays a key role in that. So that's what we're busy with on a regular basis throughout the year on an internal part. External part, I mean, we've got an enormous diverse project portfolio, as I mentioned. I mean, we do multiple projects literally on the ground. We're focusing on pests, diseases, soil and water resource management, and also wine process and quality improvements. So I think the key thing here for us is in South Africa, you know, a couple of years ago, we experienced, and the Southern Hemisphere in many extents as well, drought. It was a big problem for us, and it still is a big drought. And we did a lot of think tanks and brainstorming, and the whole world opened up in terms of how do we formulate flagship initiatives and projects going forward. So we currently have projects that basically, we formulated a project that's called what is the minimum water requirement of a grapevine to be economically sustainable in a changing environment. Now that is an enormous question, and it entails pretty much a lot of what we discussed as well, all the sensors, the technologies. It forms a big part of that, the adoption of what works. So that's what we're really working on now. And I think it's important to mention here as well. I mean, it includes things, it goes beyond that. It starts including discussions about broodstocks, about different clones. How do we enforce that? We're looking at plant breeding technologies. We know the drive that comes towards less susceptible varietals against diseases, not just maybe resistant diseases, but especially for downy and powdery mildew. That's critical for us in South Africa. And again, the disease detection and monitoring from viticulture can really drive and play towards that. We see it happening. And I think on the wine side, we shouldn't forget the wine, and because there might be people in the audience that are in the wine side. The challenges there for digitalization is really to understand and find which intrinsic wine analysis can we do that can ultimately drive premiumization. What can you measure in addition to the standard wine analysis that can help wineries to compare their wines and to benchmarking in terms of price point of profiling it intrinsically. So, and then I think the question of authenticity of wines are hot on the topic, and I think it will be discussed as well, and the digital tracking of that. So that's the type of things that we're working on at the moment. And again, it relates to all of the aspects that we already mentioned.
Okay, sounds interesting. And as you know, anybody who's interested in this, you can call WineTech and Adrian. Find him on LinkedIn. He responds very fast if you connect on LinkedIn. So yeah, great. So we've talked about where this comes from. We talked about the importance, the possible impact, and we've talked about specific projects that are happening, technologies are being used, and things that you're doing in wine tech. So as a last question before we break and take some questions from the audience, where do you see this going? What's the future of Smart Vineyard?
Joseph, okay, so yeah, we're talking a lot today.
That's why we need to take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, my seat's getting hot here. I think I'm just going to mention a few interesting things. So from my perspective, what we see is, we smart vineyards, smart viticulture, digital viticulture. It's referred to precision viticulture. It's people refer to it as talking vines, talking vineyards. I mean, and I see it, I think we get to a point where the data from the environment meets the data from the grapevine directly via smart networks, and machine learning ultimately triggers us for notifications on our phone. I touched on right in the beginning, and I think that's where things are moving, and it's already been enforced. We're not quite there yet, but it's happening. I think it's going to become very quick in the next few years, and some of the technologies exist. I mean, we already know that there are companies working on drones and doing scouts for crops, for diseases that exist already. There's some challenges with that, but I think, yes, again, the farmer with a knee problem, there's technologies that can help them. And then very interesting. We did an innovation challenge a couple of years ago, and the whole discussion evolved about, it's one thing to make predictions and looking what's happening in the environment, but what about direct plant diagnostics? I mean, where the grapevine tells us, give me water, I'm stressing, and I think in more depth, translating the molecular marker signals from the plant directly, the metabolites, how can that be used, and translate that to signals, digital signals for us to react upon. I think with growing systems driving plant signals, I think that's very futuristic, but that's coming, and it'll also help. It'll help. I mean, you already see people doing urban vineyards, rooftop vineyards, and I think this technology will help the smaller guys getting involved in the sector and maybe bring something completely new to the table. And then future stuff. Just briefly, I think we talk a lot about climate data and the value of in-season stuff. For us, where we see the value is digital innovations, taking climate data, overlaying that with concept clouds, where you capture tasting notes from events and wine styles with regions and different price points. I think that is absolutely the future that we're going to go see forward. And behind that is premiumization. I mean, also the decision making. Once you start taking all the different data layers, we talk about rootstocks, we talk about clones, we talk about water management, soil types, texture, everything, and you put all this information in the same pot, and you start mining that. What's going to come out of that? And I think that's really where the ultimate recommendations will be going forward for what to plant, what not to plant. I remember the other day at the World Estimates, when Director General Paul Rocca got a question. They said, will these climate change tools allow us to plant different varietals in future because of the climate change? And he answered very specifically. He said, not necessarily. It also depends it can also depend on clones. And I think the value of climate change can actually help us to look at other clones. You might be a wine estate that's been for the last 2-3 decades. You're renowned for Sauvignon Blanc. And you don't want to change that necessarily in future, but you might have to start thinking about different rootstocks and different clones. And I think, yes, augmented reality, the role that's going to play. We saw everything that's going to happen now with Facebook changing to metaverse, and I think the educational value of that's very interesting for upskilling workers in the vineyard remotely and in time. And I think, and then blockchain. We touched on it. We've done some workshops trying to understand the value of that and uptake of that, but really. I think the value from our perspective, what we see is now it's going to come not just for traceability, but in the circular economy. When you have to start valorizing the waste in a winery and repurposing that and bringing it back maybe as compost in the winery and using that, and the digital currencies and the credits that can go back to everybody involved in the circular economy, the importance of that. I think that's where blockchain can really play a critical role. But I mean, I'll end off here. I think on future technologies. Yes, we talk about e-labels and stuff. And I'm concerned that the digital innovations that are coming, how are we going to ultimately buy wine when we look at a bottle in the shelf? Is it going to be a scoring and a label? And we have to, I mean, we're long moving past the intrinsic product inside the bottle, and we start looking at labels and score and risk ratings and environmental compliance. So we have to figure out exactly how we're going to focus on.
Okay. So listen, we have a lot of questions here, which I'm amazed. I actually had some questions in my mind in case nobody asked questions, but now we have too many questions. So let's try to do 2 minutes max per answer. Let's do here like speed dating question answer. Okay.
Okay.
So I'll shoot, and I have my assistant here, Carlos, who's sitting in front of me, telling me when you've run over 2 minutes.
I have no assistants here, so.
Okay. So anyhow, first question. Many small producers are worried about the cost of digitalizing the vineyard. How much does it cost? Well, all my clients, which are also asking me, how much does digitalizing cost? Well, depends, but what do you say in your sector? How do I need to think about cost?
That's a big problem, I think, and that's an enormous challenge at the moment. We know that just having just a weather station as a sensor for things costs quite a lot of money, and we know one is not sufficient really to do it, because I mean, in a block, it can vary from the weakest point to the highest point, but it costs a lot of money. It varies. It's a difficult question to answer in terms of South African Ryans, but I mean, I don't know what the price of weather stations are in Europe are. But I mean, the technology is at the moment it's too expensive, I think, and that's why the people lean more towards a service provider by consultants doing it. Yes, I don't have an exact figure. It depends totally on what you want to try to achieve.
Okay.
But I think.
But do you have the cost of, what would be like the basic package? Where would you start, and how much would that cost? Can you say, or it's also that's variable?
Oh, it's too variable. But I think we've seen people that just charge for flights round about maybe 150 euros for a flight. So you can add that up. So which is not a lot of money. When you have to put up your own system, you can and that can give you flights. And I mean, we have farmers that are interested in buying their own drones, for example. But I mean, if you think maybe anything in the range, probably from maybe 5,000 euros to 50,000 euros, depends on what you want to do. But it's a very difficult question to answer because the applications are so wide.
Great, but they can always call you via LinkedIn, as I said.
Yeah,
and they can ask how could you help. Okay,
but we don't provide the service, of course.
I know, but you can recommend. So we have here a question about weather conditions. So weather conditions are becoming challenging for the grape growers in Indian conditions. However, we are advocating for DSS for vineyards. So question is, for this problem, which is affecting crops very badly, how can digitalization help? Which I think you touched a little bit, but maybe the person who has a question wants it to be more specific.
I think, the climate data and the information data is really going to help us to understand. I think the focus for now is to identify variance. We know that the climate change is forcing crops harvest dates to be shifted. It forces us to be having shorter harvests. Everything is more compacted, especially if you have white and red grape varieties combining. So it's really to the people must. I'm not sure how it's rolled out in all the countries, but climate change is really to tap into the climatologists and speak to them what is relevant for their use. I mean, the forecasting, the predictions are becoming more and more important, and I think the true value from cost savings becomes with identifying the differences in your vineyard block, and then addressing water management accordingly. You don't have to give water to the whole block holistically. You have to start targeting specific points and addressing that. And I think the climate change tools and the on-ground sensing, along with ground truthing, is very important. I'm not sure if I answered that for you.
Yeah, no, I think we do, but we'll go fast with these ones.
Okay.
I think you've answered these, but in case you want to add something, how do you think blockchain can be applied to smart vineyards? I don't have anything else to add.
You know, we've spoken with some people that started to do capturing information. So in Vineyards, I think there are some mixed feelings about the interest in terms of capturing the value chain from when the grapes are grown, the information around that for the consumers. Some consumers are interested. We're not sure how it's going to play out. It might be a novel thing for a few years, and then it might fade off. But yeah, it's interesting how when you start capturing information, that the people, they want to understand the process. They want to see videos. They want to relate. They want to feel involved with the process. And I think digitalization and blockchain provides a platform for that, but then also to show the authenticity behind the development of that and the track record. And I mean, people wants to see system. And I think smart vineyards, it's interesting. The concept seems to come more from consumers that are interested in the production process and the quality behind wine. And how we get there.
Yeah. So there's no wine sector cryptocurrency, right?
Not in our case.
Good thing.
But people are talking about it for sure.
Well, we don't have to blow that bubble yet. Okay. Yes. So let's take another one. Okay. So smart vineyards involve many technologies. How can we assure that all the data from different tools, technologies are consolidated and managed in a proper way? I mean, there's some concerns around data, cybersecurity, etc.
That's probably one of the most important, I think one of the most important questions to ask at this stage. I mean, when you means data management. The private sector wants to take charge of the data. The research community wants to get hold of the data. Everybody wants access to the data. And I think the way forward is not necessarily a centralized system. It will be a decentralized system and the integration of technologies. You know, the conundrum here is producers and grape growers, they want to move to a one-stop service provider, ideally. They don't want to work with too many people. That's the reality. So I think we have to be very cautious in terms of when the people start working with service providers, make sure that the information and the service offering that they can do and how they collect data from the sensors can ultimately be integrated sort of in an open source platform to a decentralized way in terms of the APIs and the way that the software can talk to each other. I mean, it's ultimately about connecting the dots. So that's exactly how it's going to play out in future, and where we are now, we don't even have that answer. But it's a very, very big discussion point and a very important point. So thanks for asking that question. I think, but the integration and managing the different layers, and everybody's got their own responsibility and accountability that provides the service. But ultimately, it has to be able to be integrated. And I think if you look at just things like the visualizations and dashboards that people create, and what we've personally seen, what Google has been doing, they create free versions of dashboards. You take all the visualizations and information, you integrate it on platforms to show you a one-pager. And then 2-3 years later, they tell you, well, this free version is not free anymore because we've moved from 100,000 users now to 2 billion users. So now they monetize it. And I think the monetizing of data is going to be a big, big topic for discussion going forward, and the policies around that.
Yes, this is a big topic, both from cybersecurity perspective, and also we're now seeing some of our clients from Insight asking, oh, sorry, my battery is going to run out. I'm really sorry. Okay. This is, okay, that's
maybe to add something to that, Joseph, I mean, there's a lot of questions about insurance companies as taking up the information, and how are insurance companies going to take this smart vineyards and data to do risk assessments and profiling and drive their premiums they charge for you, but also maybe as rapid assessments. I think the insurance factor in part of that and the data is also something that we need to consider going forward.
Okay, so we have like 5 minutes left. So let's do quick questions. How do you see robotics helping digitalization on viticulture? Do you see it also as a means to reduce the issue of labor shortage?
Yes, absolutely. There's been discussions. I think don't want to go into the details of labor, but it's about farm management as a whole and efficiencies, and to monitor the movement of people. All the applications as it done productively and efficiently in a rapid way. I mean, somebody once mentioned there's a lot more and more autonomous vehicles, mean, the time a person that does hand harvesting takes to fill up his basket and then walk back and throw it off into the truck and come back, why can't you just keep on going down the road? An autonomous vehicle or a robot can actually come past and just assist him to take it and then do the transport. So he doesn't waste time to walk around. So for sure, it's also, I think, about tracking the movement of people in applications. So yes, there's a place for that. But I mean, again, I don't think it's the wineries are going to and the farmers are going to invest in that in robotics. It's going to have to be maybe a service provider doing that.
Great.
For the capital investment, yeah.
Okay, I think a very interesting question, which is a bit of a follow-up. I'm sure you've seen on Facebook this picture that says, who has been the promoter of digitalization, of digital transformation? Has been the CMO, the CTO, actually has been the COVID guy. So we have a question here related to that. So somebody asked, has COVID-19 pandemic been a technology disruptor for the South African wine industry? I mean, has COVID accelerated? Have you observed acceleration in digitalization in our industry? He's asking specifically about South Africa, but we can say globally.
Yes, yeah, great. Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. I think from a research point of view, no, because the researchers couldn't go to the universities and the laboratories to advance the technologies. From a project funder point of view, we saw a lot of, I mean, there's disruption from that point of view and advancing on projects. But on the marketing side, and digital innovation really came out in terms of things like virtual tastings. We really see how winemakers started becoming more innovative in terms of what they do. And we've also recently seen that I was a part of a judging panel for the final year viticultural students, and how some incredible innovations is going to come forward, hopefully in future. They require investment in terms of how do you manage virtual tastings? Can you send wine and then organize this remotely? So I think that's one aspect of it. And also in terms of just the platforms that we're using more and more for interaction and sharing information. I mean, the world has definitely changed. So in South Africa, the uptake has been quite big in terms of looking into digitalization. The awareness has been created now. And we're seeing older people now using WhatsApps suddenly more and doing video calls and using the phones. I mean, most people don't even use the phones to the true potential that it can do. But we're seeing the older generation, and I think that it sort of did a mind shift in terms of many things of communicating, organizing, and getting things done.
Okay, great. So one last question before we go to our closing. This is the following: what do you imagine could be the role of the OIV? What do you expect from the OIV? I think this is a question from Pau. I'm guessing, but I'm not sure. So he wants some free advice from you before. He's not going to let you leave before, but being serious. So what should be the role of the organization in all of this process?
Yes, thank you for the question. Within the OIV, I think the OIV is I think the digitalization, and there's been a lot of discussions. Is to think of the way the OIV functions as an organization to make things faster, because you don't give out business cards anymore. You take your phone, you scan it, and you touch it. I think the OIV as a platform must look at how it can improve the operational efficiencies. We can make things faster, and also I think to be open more to the newer methods that's come up very quickly. I mean, I think that the challenge is going to be for us. The OIV as an intergovernmental organization has a responsibility to evaluate processes and methods holistically and get everybody involved. But we must also accommodate and be fair in terms of if one entrepreneur comes up with a fantastic idea or a researcher that can really bring change to it, how do we adopt that into the OIV and put the systems and practices in place to give space for the disruptors, and then include it with the rest of the process. I think the opportunities are really there, and we have to go that because things are going faster.
Great. So we take note. Thanks for that. Sorry, there were some more questions, so I apologize for the people who wrote them, but we're running out of time. We have 1 more minute. To finalize, I'm going to bring a quote. So I've read that you've said somewhere, the only thing that is constant is change. So be open-minded and adapt. So to close, how do you think this quote adapts to our industry?
You like asking difficult questions, so I think that the focus here is to be open-minded. You know, to implement a collective intelligence involved in which means intelligence from human and from artificial intelligence involved in obviously organizing and operating a viticultural farm and agriculture for maximum production, for maximum profitability and being environmentally sustainable. I mean, it requires change management. You know, the hardest thing in life to manage are people and their personalities. And I think the technologies and the regulations, everything will change. I mean, the environment's going to change. We know climate's going to change. So so we need to be open-minded. I think learn new things, open our eyes to think of new ways of thinking and planning. And you know, it's not what we do; it's how we do it better. So yeah.